The topic of our panel today is the hidden power of earned. So let's start with a fundamental question. What does earned mean in today's world? And where are the opportunities for our discipline in a media landscape where earning consumers' attention is increasingly the only way to reach them? Now, earning attention for the companies and brands we represent has always been what's at the heart of PR. Our legacy core competency has always been to look at the story a client has to tell and consider the value proposition for all the possible messengers of that story to create the context where the brand story becomes relevant. The other area in which we have always excelled is navigating and, frankly, manipulating a complicated media landscape. So when you consider the splintering of media in the past 20 years, with the decline in the power of push advertising, where all media has essentially become permission-based media, that's a world in which we should win. After all, it's certainly not a world in which our friends in the advertising industry naturally thrive. They've never had to create a context in which their messages make their own way in the world. That's what we do. And let's face it, consumers have become experts in how to avoid advertising. They time shift past it, they customize everything they see to avoid it, and no matter what mechanism the media buyers come up with next, they will figure out a way to get to that little red X and opt out of the content that they don't want to see. But our content is the content they opt into. It's the conversation they want to be a part of. Earned storytelling also creates its own distribution engine because earned media, by its nature, travels on the power of what's interesting to people. Yet, if we're honest, we all know that PR is still struggling with its claim to its rightful place in the new media landscape. And that's what we want to address on this panel today. That we are in a fundamentally different business than we were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. We are now in the direct-to-consumer business, so we need to become the creators of earned content that people engage with and experts in orchestrating an integrated media landscape in which content, social, influencers, and yes, paid media all come together to create an echo chamber in which our messages thrive. A world where instead of being the amplifier of advertising, earned media is at the center of brand communications. And we are all the masters of a new media universe in which strategic and targeted use of paid amplifies earned. That's why our panel today is made up of two experts who bring different perspectives to the kind of content that succeeds and how content travels. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Jeff Pyatt, who leads global PR initiatives for Outbrain, the content discovery network behind the recommended content on thousands of publishers, from CNN to The Guardian. So when you're seeing more like this on CNN, you're seeing Outbrain. And Olivia Herron, who is the VP of Brand Strategy for Curalate, which is a company that we also work with, that does visual analytics, that applies image recognition algorithms to optimize social and brand content. So we've got words and pictures here, both powerful engines in the earned media conversation. So I'd love for both of you to tell me what you're in the business to do and how earned is a part of it.
Sure. Well, so Curalate came about 2.5 years ago as we saw this really fundamental shift happening kind of in the social space, away from text and towards image-based conversations, which left kind of a gaping hole in understanding things like sentiment, conversations, et cetera, through keywords. So I'm sure you're all familiar with listening tools out there, which are incredibly powerful, but when there's no text involved, become very, very difficult to actually use. So we came about to help brands and agencies. We work with a little over 450 to help them find image-based content, understand the conversations that are happening through that content.
Great. And Outbrain is a content discovery network. As Susan mentioned, we power most of the content recommendations on publisher sites at the bottom foot of the page. And we came about when there was a realization of the trend of banner blindness, that it was more and more difficult to get through a banner ad your message to the right audience, because the banner ad, which had a click-through rate starting at 10% or so, eventually declined to 0.05%. So there was a need to get the right message to the right reader in an interesting way, in an opt-in mode. So the realization was that when a reader reads an article and gets to the bottom, they have this question, hey, what do I want to do next? And if you can provide that reader with an interesting reading experience, you can create a lot of value both for the reader and the potential end brand.
Well, and creating value is the name of the game, right?
Of course.
You know, when we work with you guys, we take some of the content that we create with bloggers and put your engine behind it in order to get the most value out of it. Of course, that also works when you get a regular media placement that may reach 1 million people, but that you want to give a longer life to. What's the value of earned in what you do, as opposed to, you know, the kind of message that, frankly, our clients often want to see, which is me, 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 me?
Of course, and earned media has never had, or even editorial more generally, has never had a persuasion problem. The value of earned media is its independent validation. So when you can get somebody, a reader, to have that interesting experience, to actually read the piece, it's incredibly persuasive. The problem earned media has had, and the problem branded editorial content has in general, is a distribution problem. When you get an earned media hit, say on Fortune or CNN, that story is published for maybe an hour or two, and then after an hour or two, the publisher stops promoting it, and the question becomes, how many people actually read this after 2 days or 3 days? And the answer is 0. It goes in the archives. Nobody ever finds it again. So if you can provide a paid media experience to amplify that piece of content, to extend the shelf life of that piece of content, there's a lot of value created.
Sure, and a lot of value for our clients who really want to see what we do increasingly become kind of an always on, and always there kind of an experience for the consumers that we want to reach. You know, Olivia, we work with Curalate on one of our big beauty brands, and you guys analyze the images that the people that we want to reach are using and sharing, and then give those insights to us so that we can work with our art directors, our Instagram photographers, and our content strategists to really reach people through images. Where do those insights come from?
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting because we are actually kind of the flip side. So you're working on really expanding the opportunity for reach on content. In the image space, you have the problem of the fact that content lives on forever. So once it's on Pinterest forever. When somebody shares it on Instagram, it's kind of going through their news feed. You can always re-access it. There's all kinds of things there. So the way that we're working with brands is we're actually helping them kind of understand this customer journey from the pre-purchase kind of inspiration of content, so saving something to Pinterest, you're planning to make something, you're going to go somewhere or do something, and then on the back end of that customer journey, the post-purchase sort of celebration, or I made that recipe, et cetera, and you're tagging it and you're associating it with the brand. And so we're working with the APIs for all of these different social networks to find all of that content and surface it so that you can be more informed as you're thinking about how do I tell our story, maybe more importantly, how do I influence the storytelling that consumers are actually doing for my brand at any point in time.
You know, when we talk about navigating this sort of new landscape that we're all looking at, and, you know, I mean, the people in this room truly are the people who have been navigating earned media forever and understanding how all the pieces work together. What advice would you give us and brands in general on how to really create an ecosystem where your messages explode and take on a life of their own?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say, and it's actually going back to the panel before this, is that you actually have to give up a little bit of control. You can't control all of this. You don't have kind of the full power in your hands. You're not really pushing out content in the hopes that it's going to resonate with someone. They're actually doing that for you. So in some ways, your goals at the end of the day are actually to make it as easy as possible for the consumer to do that. How are you going to get them to share this on your behalf? How are you going to get them to take a photo of the next recipe that they're making? And so it's this fascinating opportunity to think about where optimization of these images comes into play, and how you can think about what they're going to do on your behalf.
Mm-hmm. Jeff?
I would focus on the big change, I think, in marketing communications over the last 5 years is, as you said in your opening remarks, it's become an opt-in experience. So thinking about what are those opt-in experiences, editorial content, and that becomes I think, the central of an entire, the central point of the entire campaign, whereas 10 years ago, the central point may have been the media buy, how many eyeballs can we buy? Now I think the central point is, how can we create the most interesting content possible, and the easy part becomes getting that content out.
And what do you think defines interesting content? Are we talking about a value proposition? Are we talking about, you know, being entertaining?
This is as much an art as a science, I guess. How you define interesting, you know, when you're creating a content plan, knowing who your audience is and creating the content that speaks to those that specific audience. I think when you try to become too general, and you have maybe a call to action at the very top of the page and the timing's not right, you can get a bounce rate that's higher than you like. It's not enough of give, and then take. It's sometimes take, and then try to provide value.
Right. You get into kind of a call and response with the audience.
Right, and that's advertising, right? In the content world, it's the reverse. It's more give, and then take.
Mm-hmm. And what are both of you, what are some of the cautionary tales you've seen in how brands try to use this new media world in order to communicate and fail?
Well, I think you were talking about this earlier, but people can sniff out advertising, and they can sniff out things that are just not authentic. And it's really funny to hear from, I have some kids that I've known their entire lives, they're both in college now, and one of them said, "Oh, I hate that brand on Instagram. They only post their products." It's like, oh, I'm sorry. Good to know. And so I think that the concept of being authentic is both really, really hard for a brand because you're trying to tell this story, you're trying to get this very specific message across, and can be actually made much easier, and going back to kind of this interesting concept, if you are thinking about and using cues from the consumer. So there are all these amazing stories about brands who have gone out and seen how consumers, for example, were shooting their products. So they were shooting these recipes kind of from the top down. They said, "Oh, this is so smart." And they now shoot all of their Instagram content that way, and it's exploded for them. And they've been able to use it to kind of a means to an end. So their goal at the end of the day was not to start shooting their product differently, but was to actually get people to think differently about their product. So it wasn't just a breakfast item anymore. It became a dinner item and a dessert item. And they were able to do it using that same technique, so shooting it from the content down, but thinking about what were they putting into, you know, that specific recipe or those specific items, and it changed the story for them, which was awesome.
You know, I mean, it was, I think, one of your insights that drove us to actually hire an Instagram photographer who had who was just a kind of Instagram celebrity, who now does all of our brand shoots on our Instagram brands. And the engagement and the success of that platform the growth has been geometric, simply because the images feel authentic. I think it's also, part of what we as an industry, we've always been in this dialogue with brands and media to say, okay, here's what you want and here's what you want. Let's find that middle ground. We're now doing that with consumers.
Yes, absolutely. So the original question, I think there are two kind of cautionary themes that I would mention. One is the flip side of authenticity in the editorial world is understanding the strategy for an editorial earned media strategy versus a brand publishing strategy. So in brand publishing, I think people often make the mistake that they talk about themselves in their own content that they're publishing by themselves. And this nails that point of authenticity. That feels inauthentic. I think part of the theme of the entire panel, part of the power of earned media is that is your opportunity, that is your asset where you can really brag about yourself. So understanding the difference between the two when leveraging those assets. And I think the second is how you think about distribution. I think this is less so than it was a couple years ago, but thinking that once you create content or secure that earned media, that the distribution will take care of itself organically. And we just have like a haiku that we like to repeat that defines this problem. We say, if you write a blog and no one comes to read it, did you write a blog? And it just nicely defines the problem that, hey, creating the content isn't enough. It's equally important to think about how you're going to get it out to the audience.
Yeah, and to have the discipline and the humility to be able to say, it's not all about me.
Right, absolutely.
So, $1 million question, KPIs. Like, how do we measure our success? Because God knows no one in this room wants to hold up impressions as a measure anymore.
It's funny. So we were talking this morning about this concept of, for us at least, social 1.0 and social 2.0. So social 1.0 for a long time was these sort of fuzzy kind of metrics that followers and likes, and no one really knew what to do with it. And you're talking to the CMO and the social media manager, and they weren't speaking the same language, and there was a lot of complication there. And in social 2.0, we've moved to a place where we've been able to start measuring actually some of that. So some of the newer social networks are fascinating because they're not actually brand focused. Interestingly enough, they're product focused.
Right.
You're not liking the Gap on Facebook. You're actually liking a pair of Gap jeans, for example. So you have a lot more opportunity to really understand what's important to the consumer. And at the same time, you can measure things like traffic back to your website and time spent on site and literal revenue. But from kind of the broader social channels, and especially on sites like Instagram, which has been really interesting, one of the things that we look at with our brands are things like share of voice. And share of voice used sort of similarly to the way that you would think about it from a listening perspective, but with hashtags. So you could plug in a hashtag like lipstick for a beauty brand. And when you do that, you'll often see that other hashtags used in conjunction with that content will be things like L'Oreal and CoverGirl and Clinique, and the list goes on and on. Well, the minute that you can start seeing a change, so L'Oreal is being used more than CoverGirl, or Clinique is being used less than X, you have the opportunity to say, we've influenced the way that people are associating our products with the concept of lipstick. We've had this opportunity to create that change and also see a lot more really beautiful content out there, which is awesome.
Yep.
After we talked about that metric, I've been talking to Olivia all day about the brilliance of the hashtag share of voice metric, which I think is great. So I think with KPIs, the key is I think understanding that not all KPIs are created equal. Obviously, in the long run, you have to tell a story to your clients that how is this going to affect our bottom line. The KPI to rule all KPI to rule all KPIs is, hey, we put in this money and we got this much money out in sales. In the intermediate, I think some of the keys are just brand lift or page view lift, or things that can be measured often in creative ways. I love the creativity of that KPI, but often it's just finding a small experiment where you can tell an interesting story. So I always like to use Forbes as an interesting story, as an interesting example. If you go to Forbes, any given story on Forbes, what makes Forbes somewhat unique is that they publish in real time the number of page views on every single story. Business Insider does the same thing. The Gawker sites do the same thing. So if you get an earned media hit, before you ever start a campaign behind it, you can take a look at that page view number, which on Forbes the average is maybe 3,000 to 5,000. Do your campaign on whatever kind of platforms you're using, and then see what kind of amplification you get. If your amplification is maybe only 20%, maybe that wasn't the most successful campaign. But if you're getting into the 5x, the 10x, the 20x, that's going to be a more impressive result to your client.
Right, because at that point, amplification is engagement.
Yeah.
Which is really, at the end of the day, what our clients are looking for.
So it's figuring out an experiment that you can control, and then that you can show before and after results in.
Right.
And so, it may not be that big KPI of bottom line, but it's a controlled experiment that tells a good story.
Great. So we are just about out of time, but we'd love to take any questions that you have out there. All right. Well, in that case, I'll ask one last question of anybody. When you guys look at the future of earned media and you look at where this is going to the point of a future where we are the thing being amplified, what do you think is the way to get there?
Well, let me just say then that I'm bullish about the future of earned media for, I think, this one compelling reason. The number one thing that people consider when making, according to research from Nielsen and Forrester, among others, when considering a major purchase, such as an automobile, or a minor purchase, such as a CPG product, are the reviews. So that independent validation still has enormous impact.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think to add to it, this concept of social proof. So one of the things that we're seeing and actually doing with some of our clients is literally taking user-generated content off of Instagram, which tends to be kind of siloed and stuck in Instagram, and putting it onto their websites and allowing people to shop through images of other people wearing the product, making that recipe, doing whatever that item is. And it's fascinating to see how much social proof has not only become extremely important, but is actually the only way people will make purchases. So it's moved from, two moms talking on the playground about, where are they going to get X, Y, Z, to now two moms talking on Instagram about where'd you get that awesome costume from, and I need to go buy that. And it tends to be a less direct, so it's not that they have to say it. They can do it in a hashtag. They can do it in a photo. And that's the really cool part about kind of the space that we're in today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Oh, does somebody have a... Oh, wait.
Just a request, really. Thank you to all three of you. Great discussion. Susan, would you post your opening remarks so that we can all access that? That was a great framing of the future of our field.
Great. We're happy to do that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Thank you.